Well, good afternoon. My name is Mike Bryan. I'm a volunteer with Southern Arizona BA in Tucson, Arizona. And we're working on the Veterans History Project today with an Air Force officer from the U.S. Air Force named Pete Carpenter. Today's date is Monday, July the 18th, 2016. And Pete, why don't you give me your full name and your birthday?
All right, Mike, thank you. My full name is Wilbur, W-I-L-B-U-R, like Wilbur Wright spelled his. Wilbur Leon Carpenter, and nickname, of course, is Pete. I was born at 24th of March, 1929.
So how did you get the name Pete? Because that's not in your name anywhere.
No, it doesn't address any of my name. It happened from some little incident with one of my uncles that started calling me Pete, and it kind of hooked up, and all the way through school and the Air Force, most of the people in the Air Force had no idea what my real name was.
So tell me a little bit about what life was like before you got in the military.
Well, I was born in a very small country town. I would say probably 500-600 people scattered around the area, and grew up in a school that was local, both grade and high school co-located, and you got to know everybody and everybody knew you throughout the school. My class graduation from high school was only 17 members, and that's about the average size of the classes that we had back in those days. Growing up on the farm, I learned to do, not necessarily because I had to, but they were part of the chores for the family to do. I learned about farming, how it did. I have plowed behind a mule, pulling a single plow, walking behind him. The mule knew more about what he was doing than I did, but hey, I learned. It's something that many people have never even heard of anymore. And of course we progressed to tractors and things of that sort. I became the master of the tractor, changing all of the tools as well as operating it, making sure that it worked right. As a matter of fact, convincing my dad that it needed an overhaul, engine overhaul, and doing it along with a helper, of course. And throughout that time period, as the war years came along, there was a big exercise that the Army had throughout the Louisiana area where I was, thousands of troops from all over, trucks and airplanes and everything of that nature. I believe it was in 39 or 40, and that was my first experience of hearing a fighter fly. Mm-hmm. And close by. They did a little buzz job around the area, and the sound of a P-40 convinced me that that's what I wanted to do.
Well, before you get going here on a little later, you said your house didn't have electricity back then?
When I was born, we lived in a little town, and it was without electricity. We used lanterns and for outside, and for inside, of course, Aladdin lamps, which were something else back in those days. They were much brighter than a regular kerosene lamp would be. We had a radio that operated off a battery like an automobile, and we had a wind charger that had been installed up in a tree so that it provided the charge for the battery to keep it going. So we did have a radio. Then electricity came to our town.
How old were you then?
That was in 35, 36, somewhere along in that time frame. So and I was still a little guy.
Yeah.
And we had these in our relatively new house back then, these lamps that hung down out of the ceiling from a cord with a bulb on the end of it. We thought we were in heaven with all of that light. And the next thing that came was a a refrigerator. We were the first family in Chatham,
Chatham,
little
Louisiana.
town, to have an electric refrigerator. And
Wow.
my dad had contacts in a bigger place, and he had ordered this 6 cubic foot refrigerator. Well, when it was in the house, it just wasn't quite big enough. He says, "We got to get a bigger refrigerator. We got 6 kids." So we ended up with an 8 cubic foot refrigerator. Yay!
I don't know what they are now, but that wouldn't be very much.
Well, an average refrigerator now for most families anywhere from 18 to 30 cubic feet. So you can see the walls of it were, and it ran almost all the time. It was amazing to have an ice cube maker rather than the Iceman delivering ice to your house. And back then, of course, there was an ice cube maker. You had a thing that you put water in that froze, and then you had a little lever that you flipped, and it made all of the ice fall out of the cube. It's a
I
cube.
remember those. I remember those. You're bringing back a lot of memories here.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So you were talking about the airplane, just the sound of those airplanes just really got you.
Well, yes, because they were buzzing around low, and I could see there was only one person in it. That's what intrigued me more than anything else.
Really?
By this a short time thereafter, my oldest brother had started taking flying lessons, and just the little airplanes, the little yellow airplanes back in those days, Piper Cubs, and I thought that was the most fantastic thing.
Well, they were covered with cloth back then, weren't they?
But all of this interested me, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, particularly after all 3 of my brothers had ended up in the Navy. 2 of them went in after the war started, and the one was in the Navy and at Pearl Harbor on the USS Tennessee when it was bombed. Fortunately, he wasn't hurt, but they had to spend almost 2 weeks getting out of the locks to get headed back to Washington, Bremerton, Washington, to have the ship worked on because it had taken a couple of hits. But my mother was deeply depressed, obviously, at the news. We had heard it over a car radio, we were visiting my grandparents and they didn't have the radio on. And we heard about it out in the parking area. And my first thought was, my oldest brother was along. I said, "Let's go home and get an airplane, and I'll get a basket full of hand grenades, and we'll go over there and burn them little guys out."
Yeah.
I had no idea how far away Japan was.
But it took about, what you say, 2 weeks for your brother to make contact with you?
It was we got a card. There was no other communications. A little postcard and it had blocks, "I'm okay," and it was checked.
So what did your mom say with that, or was it
Well,
pretty
with that,
emotional?
she was extremely pleased because up until that point, we had no idea of anything that might or might not have occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And it had taken him about that long, or them about that long, to get out of the docks to head back to Bremerton. You got to remember, we didn't have communications like we have today. There was no cell phones. As a matter of fact, the only phone service to Hawaii was via radio. Shortwave radio.
So then your other 2 brothers after that, then they enlisted?
Yes, one was about to, he was eligible for the draft, so he went ahead and enlisted. He, at that time, had a wife and 1 daughter. And shortly thereafter, my brother, who convinced my mother that he should go in as well, I think he was 17 when she signed him in to go.
Oh, she did sign for him then.
And he probably had more involvement with the war later on than any of the other people, any of the other brothers did. But
Where was he stationed?
pardon?
Where was he stationed?
He was on a ship, and he was around the Okinawa area during the big boom there. As a matter of fact, he was a radar operator, and he says they were flying so close I could see the image of the airplane on the scope.
Wow. That's too close. Okay.
And that's, of course, that was when they were doing all the kamikaze stuff around the Okinawa area there. I forget, I was reading something not too long ago, and it's absolutely amazing the number of airplanes that they tried to dive into ships with bombs. That was their sole purpose. And it was the way of trying to prevent the retaking of taking of Okinawa.
Which is Japanese, or was.
And that just jump ahead, I spent about 3 months on Okinawa when I was on my way to Korea. So I got to go around and look at so much of the island, some of the old gun emplacements and whatnot. There were still ammunition and old guns, broken guns, that were in these places. Absolutely amazing.
And you really related to your brother.
Yep.
With that. Well, then your third brother, then he joined, and then.
Well, the third brother is the one that I'm talking about.
Okay.
And this part of it, his name was he was Junior, Luther C. Junior. But my oldest brother went to Florida, and he spent about a year and a half there, I guess, before the war was over, and he came back home. But my younger brother's the one that ended up at the latter part of the war.
Okay, and so then you try to enlist.
Well,
There's a story behind that.
when I was graduating from high school, I thought that it would be great to go in and be a naval aviator, because they sent you to college for 2 years, no cost, and you got paid. And then you went into the Naval Air Cadet program, get your wings and get your commission. I thought that'd be fantastic. My mother didn't think so. She says, no, 3 is enough, and that's the end of the story. And of course, one of the few times that I opened my mouth blatantly, I guess, was, well, when I get to be 21, I can do what I want to. It wasn't very nice, but she understood what I was saying.
Well, you felt pretty strongly about it. And then when you were 21, then you did it.
Well, that's pretty close to the time. As a matter of fact, I went and took all my testing, passed it, and I was, they sent me a notice and said that I was eligible for 3 different classes to select the one that I wanted. And I kind of delayed a little bit.
Was
But
this
I
in the
finally sent it
Navy?
in and said, I'll take class 51 easy and go to Randolph Air Force Base
Which is where?
at San Antonio.
San Antonio.
That was, Randolph was like the Air Force Academy, if you would, back in those days.
Okay.
They had it was a special arrangement for housing and whatnot for the cadet quarters, we called it quadrangle. The base has dual runways, one on each side, one on the east and one on the west, so it made a perfect training situation back in those days. We're flying T-6s, beautiful base, a great picture that I still look at, and it's a strange building called the Taj Mahal at Randolph. It is a big, tall building with a rounded roof on the top. And I had no idea what it was until I arrived there, and people told us, how many gallons of water does Taj Mahal hold?
Oh.
It was a water tank enclosed in a building on it, tall tower. And it's still there. It's a center point of Randolph.
Oh. So you ended up in the Air Force instead of the Navy. Like your brothers, you didn't want to.
Well, it seemed easier at the time because Barksdale Air Force Base is where I went to sign up and go into the Air Force.
Okay.
And it was a well-known base back in those days. It's one of the major Army airfields back during the 30s and the 40s.
Okay.
Permanent bases.
But you never really lost that interest in flying, did you?
No, I still have an airplane. I don't fly it much because I've got a bad eye, and right now it's kind of expensive to fly too. When you talk about $6 a gallon for gas, and it uses 10, 12 gallons an hour, it adds up.
Well, tell me about your first flight. You were saying that it was in a trainer front seat.
My first flight at Randolph, during that particular period of time, we did a lot of things leading up to it for the first month, and then we went to the flight line, and we were integrated in our training with West Point and Annapolis graduates that had just graduated from their individual schools. As a matter of fact, there was about 3 to 1 at that point. We started out with 47 young guys as cadets, and my first flight, went out to the airplane, and the guy says, "Okay, you're in the front seat." Well, he's going to fly from the back seat and show me how this thing works. He stands on the wing and he says, "This is the way you start it." And he says, "Do this, 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 and this." It had cockpit checks and whatnot, so we knew where everything was. Cranked it up. He climbed in the back seat and he says, "Okay, call the tower and tell them," huh?
Because you're flying this thing.
And he says, "Okay, just give it a little gas." And he talked me through it, and we get out to the end of the runway, and he says, "Okay, it's our turn."
So how much training did you have coming up to that?
Sir?
How much training had you had coming up to that moment?
Almost nothing, except to sit in the cockpit to know where all of the controls were, and we had little trial and error type things in a simulator,
Okay.
but nothing. I'd flown in an airplane one time before, and it was with my cousin, and he was about as good a pilot as my grandson is.
And your grandson is how old?
He's 14.
Yeah. Okay, so he's telling you to start the engine, call the tower?
Start the engine, we taxied out. He was talking to me, as between the two of us, taxied out to the end of the runway, and he says, "Okay," he says, "line up." And he says, "Now bring the power in slowly." And I said, "Huh?" And he says, "You've got the airplane." I pushed the power up, and he says, "Okay." He eased back on the stick a little bit as we approached, or actually eased forward on the stick to get it up on the wheels a little bit. The rudders, and he's talking me through it. Of course, I know that he's on the controls as well, but he was not initiating. And we took off. I can't believe anybody let me fly an airplane the first time I got in one.
And so what you had, the landing was a little bit rugged.
Oh, well, that was, as time went on, of course, you built up time and did practicing in one place and another to solo. And that meant being able to take the airplane by yourself, going and flying and landing and all of the good stuff. And this one particular morning, I had changed instructors. My old instructor had gone to open up a new base. And the new guy was a little bit older, and we took off and climbed out, and he says, "Son, give me a couple of good landings and I'll solo you today." Well, that's the wrong thing to say. We'd go out to little alternate airports and shoot landings and whatnot, and they had what we called a mobile control. There was another instructor that was there to talk to you on the radio. We came around, and I bounced the first time, and we always went to full stop, turn around. We didn't do touch and goes back then. We started taxiing back up, and he says, "Pull over by mobile control there, and I'm going to let you watch a couple landings. Maybe that'll help a little bit," because I kind of bounced that one. This is a terrible landing, but a great recovery. Anyway, we sat there and watched the airplanes for about 15 minutes, and he said, "Oh, let's go get the airplane, see if we can get out of here." We went back over to the airplane, and I thought he'd gotten in the back seat. I heard him tinkering, tying his belts and whatnot, I thought. When he finished up, he came up, patted me on the head, and says, "Give me 3 good ones now." That's, it's all yours.
Boy, that's...
I taxied out, took off. Everything went great. I never really had a problem with the airplane other than the round out and landing. Anyway, I took off, came around, and as I was turning base, the mobile control officer called, "All aircraft at Martindale continue in orbit around the airport. We have a aircraft on the runway with collapsed gear." And no. Whoa. I flew around for a little bit, and my instructor came up on the radio. He was with the mobile controller, and he says, I used my call sign, and he says, "Do you think you can get it down safely in the first half of the runway?" Yeah. With a great big "yes, sir," I came around. Best landing I ever made, touchdown right where I was supposed to on the end of the runway, 3-point landing, taxied in. He says, "Let's go home." You normally shot 3 landings, had to shoot 3 landings solo to solo. I only did 1. We took off and went back to Randolph and landed, and he says, "You're clear to go by yourself now."
Wow, that wasn't very long, was it?
Well, he was a great instructor. He was an XP-47 pilot from World War II. I had some great guides here. Ran across several of them in later years.
Well, tell me about this. There was a French cadet that was maybe along with you guys.
He was in a different class. He was in a class behind. But we all lived in the same dorms and whatnot. Different. We had 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th class cadets. In other words, you went in as a 4th class, and you gained a little viability and credibility and moved into the 1st class. So you became the leaders. But he was 1 class behind me. I knew a number of the cadets. We had Dutch and French. And he was a nice young man, but I knew that he had washed out, but I didn't know that he was still on base. Anyway, we were flying in the afternoon, so we were lined up at our quarters in front. And this airplane comes down, and these are 3-story buildings. Came down through between 2 of the buildings, right at top of it. He wouldn't have cleared the buildings. And the canopy slid back, and he's waving. And who is this nut? And we had no idea what to do. And someone said, "Well, what's going on?" He made a circle, but he didn't come back to us. Somebody got a telephone call and came out and says, "Nobody move, nobody goes to the flight line." Well, what's going on? Eventually it starts to seep through, and it said that the guy taking the airplane didn't even carry a chute with him. And he had his instructor had taken off and tried to follow him and keep up track of him and get him back on the ground. And he totally evaded the instructor, went over to Kelly, which was across the way in San Antonio, and one of the other airfields there, and buzzed the towers and one thing and another. And he finally pulled up and headed up toward Austin. And about, I guess, 30 or so miles up that road, not necessarily directly to Austin. Engine quit. He pushed it over and dove into the trees.
Wow, he ran out of gas.
And he was just such a proud individual, having washed out, that he did not want to go back home and be criticized for that.
Wow.
And all his instructors, everybody that had flown with him, said outstanding pilot, he just couldn't land. The T-6 was
Wow.
a terrible airplane to land.
Well, then shortly after that, you were doing some night cross country to the.
Oh, that was a T-28. That was at Williams Air Force Base. That was several months later.
Oh, that was later. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we left Randolph after 7 months. Got to, as a matter of fact, I arrived at Phoenix on a bus on the 14th of February 1951. Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
That also is another special day. It's the 39th birthday of Arizona.
Really?
As a matter of fact,
Arizona was a state in 1912.
I had no idea at the time, but later on I did.
Yeah.
I saw Phoenix, and it was such a beautiful little city.
Yeah.
And I said, this is where I want to always be.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely beautiful, small city. The people were fantastic.
Fell in love with the desert.
And of course, Chandler was out away from there. It was a nice little drive over, but go to Phoenix on the weekend and whatnot. And today, I would have a problem wanting to even stop for any long period of time in Phoenix.
It's a huge community up there of large cities.
I have some friends there, and I don't go up very frequently. But Tucson was a little different in that respect, and it came much later. But the T-28, we were flying at night, and we were supposed to be solo. It was our solo night cross-country in a T-28, which is single-engine, two-place airplane, real update of T-6. And we had taken off, going up to, I forget the name of the crossing, but northwestern part of Arizona, and then down to Gila Bend. Mm-hmm. Well, between that place and Gila Bend, there was a slight moon. It wasn't real bright. Another airplane came up and joined up on my wing.
You weren't expecting that.
And we weren't supposed to do that, of course. I looked over and I saw the number and realized it was one of my buddies.
Yeah.
So he's just flying formation along. And I looked back, and the lights were out on the other T-28. It was coming in from the other side, except it had a passing light that you couldn't turn off. It was a red light. Mm-hmm. And I saw that. I said, I wonder what that is. And I said, well, I guess it's one of my other buddies. So I'll have a flight of 3.
So you're flying, you're gathering up a formation of planes here.
We weren't even supposed to be close to each other. As we approached Gila Bend, there on the radio, it announced aircraft so-and-so make a right 360-degree turn. Well, that was the number of the airplane on my right wing. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh my God, that's an instructor in that airplane. And it was. It was another friend of mine, but there was an instructor in the back seat with him. So he had tried to alert me, and he couldn't do it without being caught. So we headed back to Williams and landed. And my instructor, who was an aerobatic pilot as well, World War II guy, he met me at the airplane, and what in the hell have you been up to? We had a little interrogation that evening, and after all the guys were back on the ground, we confessed our bad points of doing something we weren't supposed to. And I looked back in the back of the room behind a row of lockers, and I saw my instructor, who was a little short fellow, and he hit his knee and grinned when we apologized for what we did. We went home. I didn't, or went to our quarters, and it would not have surprised me at all if they had told us to pack our bags and go home, because that's how serious they were about some things, okay?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't question. Nobody said anything from there on until we'd graduated and we were having a little get together with the instructors. My old instructor had left, and 3 or 4 of us
Let me get your glasses here.
were having a beer, and he says, you know, we thought we were going to get sent home. We went home that night, and he says, you're kidding. No, sir. He said, that was a plus in your favor. That showed that you had wanted to be a fighter pilot. You were going to do it your way.
They like the aggressiveness.
That's right.
Oh my God. So then there was a story about when you lost pressure during one of your flights over Phoenix. You lost oil pressure. You had a 4-ship flight over Phoenix.
And I lost what?
Oil pressure. Says you lost oil pressure during one 4-ship flight over Phoenix, and it created a severe vibration.
Oh, that was while I was still at Williams. That was an F-80.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, it was Friday the 13th, 1951.
Oh, this is well, no, that's about the same time frame, isn't it?
Anyway, I was flying with my instructor with 3 other guys. We were just about to graduate from flying school at that point, flying F-80s. And he made a turn away from me, so I had to add power, and it just started vibrating terribly. And I checked, no oil pressure. And I turned and headed back to Williams. And back in those days, we did things a little differently. I dove onto initial, pitched out, came around, and I looked down, and the engine is at 10%, which is nothing. It's not even starting. And I got on the ground all right, and as I touched down, mobile control called me and says, pull the battery, disconnect, you're on fire.
You're on fire.
I'm a cadet. When the instructor says do something, you do it without, particularly under those circumstances. I pulled the battery disconnect. What did he have me do that for? And I don't have a radio. Can't open the canopy or anything. I rolled to the end of the runway, and fire trucks come up, and
that was that was it. And then take me through what was going on in your life. Yeah, you said you got the mumps about that same time, or was that?
The mumps came after I was at Nellis. I was almost finished with gunnery school. After graduating flying school, we either went to Luke or Nellis. And as a matter of fact, I have to tell you this one, when I came through Phoenix on my way to Nellis.
Which is where? Where's Nellis?
Nellis is at Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, okay.
And my friend, as a matter of fact, my best friend at that point, had gone to Luke Air Force Base at Phoenix. And when I was going through Phoenix, I stopped and talked to someone, and they said, did you know? And I said, no. He said, well, he crashed and was killed last week. He was the first guy in my class. Mm-hmm. And of course, he was my best friend at that point. And then on to Nellis. Those things affect you, but it can't be a major thing anymore, okay? Yeah. On to Nellis, went through pretty much all of the course, flew on a Saturday, and Sunday morning I was in terrible shape, so I went over to the doctor's office, and he said, you got the mumps. I said, well, I was over here yesterday, day before yesterday, and you didn't know what was wrong with me, and I flew. He says, you did what? I'd been out on the gunnery range pulling 4, 5 Gs, and he says, you shouldn't have done that. I said, well, nobody told me. You didn't put me in a hospital or anything. He says, you're in the hospital now. You're not leaving. And I was glad to be there. For 2 weeks I laid on my back.
Really hit you hard. Huh?
Terrible, terrible pain. And it manifests itself in different things, of course.
Sure.
The nurses were the biggest problem with that problem.
Well, we'll revisit the mumps thing here in a little bit, but then when you got over the mumps, then where did you go?
Well, after the mumps, I finished up my flying, of course, but I went to the West Coast. We thought we were going to catch a flight out and go direct to Korea. Yeah, we were there for about 2 weeks, I guess. And eventually they put us on a ship to go. And we were going to Okinawa for 3 months before we went on to Korea. And it was a great vessel to go on. There was 13 of the cadets that I had gone through flying school with that were now second lieutenants. There were about 15 nurses and WAC ladies. Of course, they couldn't be put in the same area as all of the enlisted guys. We had about 1,000 guys down below deck, Army and Air Force and whatnot, that were on their way to Okinawa and Korea. And then there was, I think 15 or 20 wives with kids on board. The upper deck where we were at, we built it in the Tudo stateroom. We had no booze, legal. And
it all seems to show up.
we had a dining room that we were served at a table and all of that sort of thing, and they'd have a little band or something play, and we'd dance, or the jukebox or whatever. I got a black eye out of all of this. As a matter of fact, I think I mentioned it. I had a can of fried potato strings, if you will. Back in they came in a can, and we were playing cards at the table. And this little boy looked like he 4, 5 years old, something of that sort, came over, and he kept looking at me and looking down at that. And I offered him some. He took one handful and looked at me, took another handful and looked at me, and all of a sudden he put one of them down and hit me in my eye, and it blackened it. Where he hit, because he poked me right in the eye.
What was he upset about? But you were provost marshal at that point.
I was provost marshal on the ship, and I didn't even know what the word meant.
Did you ever find out?
Oh yes, they told me.
Okay. But then when you arrived in Korea, you did a number of combat missions there before your father.
Well, it was a rather slow start. We flew a little bit on Okinawa, and then we went to Korea, and I am trying to remember now whether we arrived in February or March. And I flew, I think, 9 or 10 missions, and my father passed away.
Was this like 51, 52?
I'm sorry?
What year is that?
That was 1951.
One.
And as a matter of fact, I gave you a wrong date a while ago. No, it was the right date.
Okay.
No, it was 50. This is 52. This should have been 52 this time around.
So this March, it's your early part of the year.
Anyway, I had not anticipated being to come home. It was a rather strange occurrence to begin with. I just landed from combat mission, and the ops officer says, Red Cross guy wants to speak to you over there. And I said, what does he need to talk to him about? And he says, you need to talk to him. So he says, I'm sorry to inform you that your father passed away. And I said, when did that happen? And he says, about 4 or 5 days ago. And I said, you mean you're just now telling me? And he says, well, we're trying to get you a leave to go home. And I said, that's not telling me the way it should have been done. Anyway, my ops officer says, you're not going to be flying for the next week. Get on a plane, go to Itazuki, Japan, and relax. So I went down, and one of my buddies that I'd gone through flying school with there was there. I went to the local telephone place. Long distance telephone call, like I said a while ago, was shortwave. And I called my brother, and he says, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm in Japan." And he said, "You're supposed to be on your way home." And I says, "I am?" He says, "Yes, your leave was approved." So I called back to the base and said, "Yeah, we got a message in today." I said, "Okay, can I go?" "No, you have to come back to K-13 and pick your orders up and go back to Japan and catch a flight."
Oh.
So I did. It all worked out well. Came back. Spent, as a matter of fact, I spent 30 days back, as long as I was back there. And then when I went back, everybody says, "What are you doing back? You didn't have to come back over here." So you guys are still here. You're all my classmates. Why? So I went back and finished my missions. I flew a total of 100 missions.
So you did do the 100, because the 100 was what you flew when you
That's
were
what,
assigned somewhere.
that was a normal.
Okay, you were talking about some gunner managed to punch 15 holes with 50 caliber through your plane. What's the story behind that?
Well, we had a big operation that particular day in Pyongyang, which is the capital of Korea, and it was during the time frames that they were trying to negotiate, but they couldn't get anyone to talk. Okay, and Pyongyang was a special affair. I was scheduled to fly 5 missions that day to Pyongyang. On my 3rd mission, we were hitting a particular place at low level. We were down right at telephone pole level. And the guy that was leading the flight didn't use power very wisely. And he made a turn, and as I turned, somebody on the ground opened up and hit me several times.
Oh, that was from the ground then, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, it just was right behind your cockpit?
Well, it's actually went in the wingtip and came out and hit, I would say, 2 feet behind my seat.
That's
It was
50,
a slight angle.
that's 50 caliber.
Yeah. Right out through the tail. I had no idea. I never felt a thing. It was a little turbulent weather, and I got back on the ground. I filled out the forms and started to walk away, and my crew chief says, "Lieutenant, come back here. You got bullet holes in my airplane."
Wow. Did that make you think
I
again?
think there were 15 holes in it.
Yeah.
50 caliber.
Well, there was a flight too when you were talking about you were in locked position. There was something with your aircraft. Well, let me see.
Are you talking about a P-47?
Yeah. You were supposed to be flying a P-47 taking it to Cuba or something.
I had just gotten back from Korea,
Oh, this is back in the States. Okay.
taken leave.
Well, before you get into that, then, while you're in Korea, I mean, that was the first war that you really had jets, on both sides and fighting each other and all of that. Did you ever do any like air-to-air stuff, or was it like air-to-ground mostly?
It was all air to ground.
Okay.
We were kind of halfway prepared for it, but many people decided the F-80 wasn't a good air-to-air airplane, and it didn't have the sufficient power. If you flew it properly, you could evade and in some ways get an advantage if you sucked them into your way of doing it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the first MiG that was shot down in Korea was shot down by an F-80.
Oh.
The people that were flying the MiGs early on weren't real well qualified.
Okay.
That had a lot to do with it, but there were certain capabilities that the MiG did not have that you could evade him, okay? And even though it had higher power to weight ratio and could climb faster and do certain things. It could only reach a certain limit speed-wise, and it would disintegrate.
Well,
But
in some of the readings,
I never encountered the MiG. I had a couple friends that did get attacked, and one in particular made a pass on him. He didn't even punch his bombs off. He was so far out. He slipped past, and then pulled up in front, a little ways out. But the guy saw what he did, and he hosed him down.
Wow. Well, there was a difference in the training, I guess, with the Korean pilots versus the Russian pilots.
Well, you've heard the stories. Well, we suspected different pilots flying the airplanes other than the North Koreans, obviously, but
Because their talent was better.
we could get nobody to admit that
Oh, okay. Okay.
later in the game.
It's the kind of thing that everybody knows, but nobody can prove. Okay. And then, what happened with this? There was well, let's get into this one. So you're on is it the P-47? Talk a little bit about your experience with that.
P-47. That was after I got back to Amarillo, and I had only been back a week or so, maybe a little longer than that. And I went to work one morning. We were in a special outfit that moved airplanes, and they says, "You got to get checkout in the P-47 today." And I said, "Huh?" I said, the closest I've ever been to one, probably half a mile away. "Well, you're going to fly it today." I said, "I am?" "Yeah, here's the manual. Here's the test that you have to take." And I said, "You going to have me do all of that?" And he says, "And here's the answers to the question."
And this is your training for a new aircraft, huh?
I'd never been in one, never even been touched one. And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Oh, by the way, you have to fly in the back seat of a T6, get 3 landings, so you get back in the prop business." All of this in one day. So I sat down and did the questionnaire and whatnot. Nobody knew any more about it than I did. And the guy that was going to check me out had flown the airplanes before. We go out to the airplane after I'd flown the T6. I got in the cockpit. He started it, showed me how, but starting it himself. And he runs back and gets into his airplane. We taxi out to the end of the runway and we're ready to take off. And he says, as a matter of fact, we were on the runway. He says, "I can't get my canopy closed. We'll have to go back in." So we taxied back in. I waited a little bit. He shut down, so I shut down, went over to his airplane. And I worked on his canopy and finally got it fixed. And he says, "Okay, well, let's go." I go jump back in my airplane, crank it up, taxi out. I'm first to take off because he's going to fly and watch me.
He's the trainer.
We do the run up at the end of the runway, which means that you run up almost to full power. You have to have the stick full back and all of this sort of thing to keep it from. But I pulled on the runway, lined up, and just as I started to lift off, the airplane just went crazy on me. I started drifting and I was pushing rudder and using aileron, and finally the right wingtip hit and it bounced and went over like this and hit like this and kind of half spun around. The engine came off and broke off and caught on fire. And I slid to stop. One gear was collapsed on it and flame was coming up over the cockpit. I couldn't get the cockpit, couldn't get the canopy to open. I had my hard hat on, which was a jet age type thing, and I said, "Well, I'll see if I can knock it off." My first attempt, I'd forgotten to unlatch my lap belt. I didn't do much of anything. The next time, it knocked the canopy when I hit it completely clear, and it was not burned in the fire. It's a pretty heavy piece of equipment. Jumped off, ran out in the weeds, and took my chute off. Well, this was at Amarillo, Texas, and it was co-located with the local air terminal on one side and the air base on the other side. And I'm closer to the airline terminal, so all these people start pouring out, running over toward the airplane. It's burning, and the fire trucks haven't gotten there yet. I walk around on the other side, took my chute off on the opposite side, walked over, all I had was flying suit on. Even put my hat back on. And several guys came running up and did the pilot get out, the pilot get out? And I said, I don't know, I just got here.
Which was true.
But it burned up pretty badly.
Did you ever figure out why the plane wasn't responsive?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, the P-47 had a control lock that was built into the airplane. There's a little lever down by the stick on the floor of the airplane. And when you pulled it back, it activated the system. If the stick was in the proper position and it was locked, there was a pin that would come up in it, you couldn't move the stick. So that ruled out that I had locked it because I had full stick control. The rudder pedals would only lock when you went almost stopped at the center position, and they would lock in that position. And that's exactly what happened. I taxied out with the airplane. It had rudder control, steer, took the active, and was lifting off when I just got to the right neutral place, and it locked the rudders. And without rudders, a P-47, you ain't going to go very far unless you're already airborne.
So you slid to a stop and
the only thing that we could ever assume is when I had gotten out of the airplane and gone over to the other place to control lever, locking lever, had been moved. It didn't lock the control. You follow what I'm getting at?
No. I mean, it's,
Because you had to neutralize the rudders very slowly for them to lock. So if you moved them fast, it would go right past the lock position.
so you didn't lock
I
it?
didn't know.
So who do you think locked it?
Well, a crew chief or who knows, you know?
Yeah. I'll be darned. Because you had not been in that plane, but
It's
a
the
few
first time
minutes.
I've ever been in.
Yeah. So your first flight in the P-47 was
It was the first and only flight, and it only lasted about 10 seconds.
and what is a high flight?
A high flight was back in the earlier days was going to Europe via
Europe.
the northern route, the island routes and whatnot, up through Dover, Delaware, Bangor, Maine, Goose Bay, Narsarsuaq, Greenland, Keflavik, Iceland, and down to Prestwick, Scotland. That was about the only way that we could go with the gas that we had. Of course, we didn't have air refueling back in those days. Mm-hmm. And these are all kind of outlying bases. As a matter of fact, I have pictures, not very good ones, from Greenland. Mm-hmm. And it's a really weird Narsarsuaq BW1 Greenland, southern tip. And as a matter of fact, the one time, the last trip that I made through there, we were at Goose Bay, and it snowed, and the ice on the runway at Narsarsuaq. It was getting fairly close to Christmas, I guess. We were 10 days or so from Christmas. And we're going to be stuck here in this place for the rest of the year. Well, somebody made the decision, hey, we're not going to let 6 inches of snow and 4 inches of ice prevent us from completing the trip. We went to Narsarsuaq. That's what the runway conditions were. Landed and eventually went on to Europe. But that was kind of hairy going into the place with that much snow and ice.
Well, you were ferrying planes. That was
Oh, these were new airplanes.
okay. And then the P-47 you were flying to Cuba, was that before the
P-47
rebellion?
was a rework, and some of those airplanes were almost brand new. It had been sitting in Oklahoma ever since the war, and they'd do a quick, real nice cleanup job and overhaul them and take them to Cuba and to some of the other Central and South American countries.
So this was before Fidel Castro had
It was before him.
before the rebellion, yeah. Okay, and then you started ferrying planes to Europe.
Yes, well, that's what our primary job was, and I flew 84 and 86s to Europe.
Okay.
And then, of course, later on, when we started rotating in 100s and whatnot, it's air to air. Refueling, you didn't have to go through all of
But it was still back in those days. You know, even with refueling, it was a little more
that.
dangerous.
Well,
than
it was.
now.
'Cause our communications wasn't the most elaborate. And the navigational systems were really weak because we were still using ADF. You get in a cloud with ADF, and sometimes it decides it wants a thunderstorm rather than to where you want to go.
What's an ADF?
Automatic direction finding. It's low frequency,
Oh, okay.
and the needle points to where you want to go. So we did back at most of that. Europe and en route did not have TACAN,
Okay.
and our tankers did not have radar. We steered to find the tankers by punching the mic button and getting a steer from the tanker, then turn such and such heading.
Wow.
And then you had to visually find him out over the open water. He's down at a lower altitude, and you're way up here waiting to see if I got enough gas to go back to where I just passed.
That's pretty gutsy flying. It's a lot different from today, isn't it, with the technology today?
Oh yes, a lot different. There's one story in there, I think, that flying the F-100, that I had a special VIP in the back seat of the airplane with me. And this was not the greatest maneuver that everybody did, but one of the young guys didn't get to work to drop off the tankers, and we left him down around 15,000 feet in the clouds, and we were about 50 miles ahead of him. And I was elected to turn around and wait for him, and so he could catch up, and he finally located me. We finally caught the rest of the flight over near the Azores. And then when we went into the other places, it was about as bad, but GCA, which ground control approach, told me to go to my alternate. I said, I can't, I don't have enough gas. And they hung up on me. I'm talking now radio. And I called the tower and says, I'm making a ADF approach into this base in Chaumont, France. There's about 300-foot ceiling, raining. And my wingman stuck with me, and we got on the ground without any problem. My passenger was later, he was at that point Headquarters USF Director of Operations out of Pentagon. He's a 2-star general, and I'm a captain.
You didn't know up until then who the heck it was.
Well, it turns out his name was General Preston, Maurice Preston, and he ended up being a 4-star later on, and was commander of the Air Force in Europe. After we came back, about a month after we were back, he came back Cannon and had someone call me to come out. He wanted to have dinner with me. he says that was a great experience for him. I have a letter from him and things of that sort.
You still have the letter? I mean, he was.
Well, I don't know whether I've got it handy or not, but I got it someplace.
No, I don't want you to. But it was kind of nice getting a pat on the back and
oh yes,
attaboy.
When he got out of the airplane, he patted me on the back and gave me a thumbs up. The airplane was still running when he climbed out of the airplane. This was at 10:30 at night, and it was raining. A staff car met him. I had to walk in the rain.
Yeah, that's when you really get the.
He's a nice person. He's a good person.
Okay, there was well, you were talking about a tanker rendezvous, but that was what you were just talking about when you were trying to get over to France and stuff.
Oh, that was probably one of the hardest trips that I made because so many things involved in it. And I had just, actually I shouldn't have even been on the trip because I had just come back from Stead Survival School and I hadn't flown in a while.
Well, it seems like you did a good
But I
job.
volunteered to go.
Yeah. Well, the volunteers get to go first, right? Well, apparently you did a pretty good job on it, according to the general.
Well, it worked out well, and unfortunately some of the other people didn't have as good a fortune as I did in many cases. But during that particular time, that 1 year, I made 3 round trips to Europe via this method. That was the hairiest one.
Now, at what point did you end up I'm seeing in Germany that you were, of course, you weren't married at the time you were ferrying these planes across, were you? Or were you?
We were married in '56, so no. The early ones were all earlier on. I was single and wasn't interested in anything except maybe dating a few girls here and there.
Well, there was something about a Miss Universe pageant.
That was my first experience after I came back from Korea. I was at Amarillo, and about 6 months later, 8 months, I guess, I was transferred to Long Beach, which they'd split up the different sections of multi-engines and single engine, and I ended up at Long Beach, which was an ideal place, of course, for a bachelor. Lots of fun. And one day, one of the guys came in and says, "Hey, they're looking to see if anyone would be a escort for some of the Miss Universe people that's held in Long Beach at that year." And I forget how many young ladies there were. I have never seen so many pretty, well-dressed young women in all my life. And I ended up being the escort for South Carolina or North Carolina. I don't remember which.
Libby Walker from Miss South Carolina.
And it was great. I ran into several other people, met several of the other girls while I was there. She was a very nice lady and had invited me to come by and meet her family and whatnot, and it just never materialized. We exchanged notes and whatnot from time to time. Back then we didn't have cell phones and couldn't talk quite as frequently as we do today.
It was a lot more expensive to talk about. Okay. Okay, so what came next?
Sir?
What came next? What came next? You see, so after I say what happened next, and after you leave Long Beach?
Oh, after I left Long Beach, I went to communication school in Illinois at one of the Air Force bases here right outside of St. Louis, and that's where I met my wife while I was going to school there that I mentioned to you before. Would you like for me to go back through that?
Yeah, because we were just talking we weren't on on camera then?
Well, the little city there, back in those days, was rather sedate and closed, I guess, compared to what we have today. And on a Sunday afternoon, a friend and I were out driving around and spotted these two young ladies in a nice two-tone Plymouth, and we followed them around a little bit. They didn't realize we were following them, but I said, hey, maybe we can work something out here. Anyway, they departed and turned around and came back a little bit later, and I saw them coming up ahead, and I pulled over to the curb on the right side of the street, headed toward them, got out of my car and pointed my finger at them and told them to stop. They thought I was a cop in plain clothes. And so I went over and I met the girl and her friend, and she was to become my wife about 2 years later.
You knew right away, didn't you?
She was a very pretty lady, and she thought I was a cop too when I had approached her initially. But we dated for about 2 years, I guess, and eventually we decided that it was time to, she understood what being an Air Force wife was and how difficult it could be. So she agreed to marriage on 1 April 1956, Easter Sunday. And of course, April 1st is April Fool's Day. I've almost got beaten up a couple of times for saying, oh, you just thought we got married. That was an April Fool's joke.
The preacher was really a bartender. No. But you were married, and it was, tell me a little bit about her.
Well, she was rather a quiet lady compared to many. She was not without speech, but she normally knew what she was talking about. She spoke very clear English, and I will have to update that a little bit because she did not speak any English until she was, I think she told me, 11 years old.
What language did she speak? What was her
Her
name?
mother was German, had come to America German, and her teachers, she was from Pennsylvania, her teachers just automatically let her speak German in school. And I think it was her 3rd or 4th grade that the teacher says, I don't speak German, you're going to have to learn to speak English. And that's when she learned to speak English.
Were they speaking German in her household, or was she born in Germany?
Oh, yes. In the household. Her mother was still speaking German in the household.
In America.
She couldn't speak English. Well, she could speak a little English, but primarily, she said, when I went to school, the teachers thought that was great.
Okay, but she was born in the U.S.?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And she said once she started learning to speak English, she made it a point to learn to speak English as pure as possible. And you would never know it, that she even could understand German. Very good English, very pronounced. Anyway, I have to tell you another story about that aspect of it. We were stationed in Germany and had gone to see one of her aunts that lived up in another part of Germany one weekend. And we're driving along, and I said, oh, how did we get to this street? And she says, I don't know. She says, there's a policeman up there, German policeman. I said, okay, so I pulled up beside him. I said, ask him if he knows how to get there in German. She rolls down the window and she says, can you tell me how to get to this street? I said, hell, I could have done that.
In English?
In English.
Yeah.
And the guy came back in perfect English. He says, oh, it's just down the way. But I got all over for not speaking German. Here we are in a German city all by ourselves.
Probably found the only person who spoke English. And that was Honey Jean. That's a beautiful name.
She was very careful about that name. It wasn't two separate names. It was one name, all spelled together.
So is there a German translation for that, or
I have no idea.
was that her name that she was given when she was born?
Yeah.
Okay.
At least that's what's on her birth certificate.
Okay. Let's see. So you're after you're married though. Is that when you go to Germany?
And we went to, well, first of all, I was in Clovis, New Mexico, and we spent about 5 years there.
Oh, okay.
And she learned well about the Air Force, became friends with different people military people, and it even worked at the base. When I would go overseas, she would go to work out at the base as secretary or receptionist or whatever. She did almost everything. And like I said, for about 6 or 7 years, I was gone a lot. And she said he was gone at least half the time that we were married back in those days. We lived off base, had bought our own house, and like I mentioned a while ago, the furniture and everything else. And a lot of that came from her working. She would spend that money for different things of that sort.
Well, how you ended up in Clovis, there's a story behind that too, isn't there? Weren't you given a choice?
Well, that was a strange thing. After I graduated from communications officer school, I was sent to Shaw Air Force Base, a communications organization there. And I'd been there for a couple of weeks, maybe a little longer. And one of the guys because I was a bachelor at that point, had set me up with the commander that I was going to fly the T-Bird with him to go on trips and whatnot, which wasn't a bad deal. But he took off on leave, and his deputy, who was also a colonel, saw me in the hall and he says, "Go on in the office, I want to talk to you." And I said, "Well, what did I do now?" And we sat down and he says, "I know you're a fighter pilot." He says, "I know you want to go back to flying fighters." He says, "The boss is gone and I'm going to retire in about a month. Where would you like to go?" And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And he says, "I can get you to either England Air Force Base, which is in Alexandria, Louisiana, or to Clovis Air Force Base." At that time, it was Clovis Air Force Base in New Mexico. And I said, "What kind of airplanes are they flying?" "Well, England is flying F-84 straight wings, and Cannon is flying 86Hs. And I says, "I want to go to Cannon."
Plus, that's close to Phoenix, where you had fallen in love with.
Well, went to Cannon, and it was a different story, and I was about to leave again to go to Alaska in the communications business. And several of us were visiting in the quarters, and the general's daughter was one of the young ladies there, and some of the other people. And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to be transferred to Alaska, and I think I'm going to get out. My time is up." A couple of days later, we were back together and talking, and the general's daughter says, "Oh, Dad wants to talk to you." "What do I need to talk to him about?" Well, I went through channels, and everybody looked at me and says, "What does he want to talk to you about?" And I said, "I haven't any idea." I said, "I don't know him. I've seen him and met him." I went to his office 5 o'clock in the afternoon and everybody was leaving. He says, come on in the office. He says, I understand you're thinking about getting out of the Air Force. I said, yes, sir. He says, what's the problem? I don't want to go to a base where I can't fly airplanes, and if I get out of the business now, I'll never get back in it. He said, well, let me see what I can do about it. We talked for a few minutes. I went up to the officers club after it finished up and was having a beer, and a staff duty officer showed up. He's a major. He says, where do you know General Omar from? I don't. I know him from here. He says, well, I sat in there and listened to him on the telephone talking to the personnel people. And he said, you can walk on water, can't you?
Really? Your reputation must have gone before you.
And I said, you're kidding me. He says, no. He says, he was on that phone. He says, he's just about got something worked out to get you out of that assignment and back into the flying business. I says, you're kidding.
Wow.
Anyway, the next thing I knew, I had orders for a specific date to report to a squadron, fighter squadron. Another one, I was assigned to one, but on such and such date, and go to Europe on rotation for 6 months, which would give me a new return date and would screw all of their paperwork up. And I would be assuming a different AFSC, but it was close enough that it would work. And that's exactly what happened. I was the avionics officer in the squadron. Went to Europe. And I met some people while I was there. One probably would prefer that I didn't mention his name, so I won't. Anyway, after the 6 months tour was up, I came back, and there was a big reorganization in the wing and the squadrons, and there was no longer an avionics officer assigned to a squadron. There was one assigned to the wing. You're now back full-time pilot status.
Wow. Well, he carried your water on that one, didn't he?
And, well, it worked out well. As a matter of fact, I made a lot of trips with them, but the last year I was there, it's not normal for it to happen, but as a captain, I took over the one of the special pilot check things as a captain, and it just didn't happen normally. Wow. It was at least a major slot, and I kept it for a while, and I didn't ask for it. I was told that was my next duty assignment.
Well, when did you get promoted then after?
It took a long time to get, back in those days, to get promoted to major from captain. Mm-hmm. And I went to Europe and served a 3-year tour there. And at the end of that tour was when I got promoted to major. How many years was that? That was 1964 when, and I think I'd been in service 13 years. Mm-hmm. Okay. So back then, because of the backlog of World War II guys, had just devastated promotion to major. Mm-hmm. It took extra long time. But when I had gone to Germany, I was involved in several different things there, and somebody says, hey, there's a new general coming in, 17th Air Force commander. He wants an aide, and he wants him to be able to fly F-100 Fs. I put my name in, along with about 15 other guys. Yeah. And he called me, or his secretary called me and asked me to come by, and I was on Nuke Alert, as a matter of fact, sitting alert. And I went in on a Saturday morning, and we talked for about half an hour. I got up, figured I had my day in court, and he'd let me know down the road. And he says, "Captain, if you want the job, it's yours." And I said, "Oops, I better think about this a little bit." And I said, "All right, sir, I'll think about it, and I'll get back." I headed over to the door, and I opened the door, and I turned back around. I said, "Sir, if I can maintain combat ready status, I'll take the job." He says, "I wouldn't have it any other way."
Wow.
I was his pilot primarily, and teaching him. I wasn't an aide like carrying his bags and that sort of thing. And he told me that.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience for about 2.5, 3 years.
Wow. Tell me about Vietnam. How did you end up in Vietnam? Is that the duty that you were in when you ended up getting orders for the Orient?
You doing what? Well, I was at the time I had gone through command and staff school and gone to a duty assignment that was supposed to be for 2 years, minimum of 2 years. And about 6 months after I was there, somebody called me and said, "Hey, it's time for you to pack your bags again." I said, "You're kidding." Anyway, I ended up, it was delayed a little bit, but I came to Davis-Monthan to go through the F4 to go to Vietnam. And it was a 6-month deal. It was a waste of time as far as I'm concerned because of my background and experience, but we built a house while we were here and had been told that I'll probably come back here.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the 366 gunfighters wing at Da Nang. And I had flown, I think, around 30 missions at the time. And I got word that I had just been transferred to 7th Air Force. And I said, "What the hell am I going to do down there?" Well, no one wanted to surmise anything. So I said, "Can I go down and talk to them and see what's going on?" And I went down, and it had to do with a project that I had worked on the sidelines with. You may have heard of it, Igloo White. And I had to do with munitions. And they were getting ready to bring that into country,
In Vietnam.
into Laos.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And Thailand. And I said, "Hell, I guess, but I want to finish my tour." He said, "Oh, no problem. You finish up with what we want you to do, and you go back in 3 months." I ended up finishing that up. I went to work one morning, and the guy that told me that he was going to let me do that was gone. He rotated. And about a week later, I had a gallbladder operation, the old style.
Ooh.
And I was grounded for 3.5 months, I guess. And by that time, I says, "Hey, I'm going to be here a year, and I'll have to extend." And I wasn't too interested in that at that point. So that kind of frosted me a little bit, that I missed out on the flying tour, because I had just been offered a squadron ops job by a guy that I still stay in contact with, and he felt that I didn't want to do it. It's the reason I took the other job, and it wasn't. I had tried to get out of it, but just couldn't handle it. Anyway, I guess the worst part of the whole thing was Cat. I was in Saigon. I lived off base by myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 2 miles from the base. And I woke up about 2:30 in the morning on their New Year's Day, and I knew what their procedures were as far as fireworks were concerned. They were supposed to cease at midnight. And they were pretty prompt on that sort of thing. It was 2:30 in the morning and all of this noise, and I said, what in the world is going on? And I opened the drapes, and there was a flare ship overhead dropping flares, C-47. There's a helicopter flying in trail with it, and there was tracers going up from a building across about almost a block away. And I said, what is going on? And I pulled it back and I turned on AFN radio. There is nothing but not sad music, but loud music playing at this time of the day, and no announcement, no nothing. Mm-hmm. And I looked out the window again, still nothing. So I turned the lights out. I said, well, I didn't have a gun. I had my flight gear with me, and I said, my knife is in that bag. I went in the dark looking for it, couldn't find it. I said, well, I'm just out of luck if somebody comes through the door. As it started to get daylight, I went into the bathroom and turned the light on, cleaned up, put clean clothes on. I had a motor scooter that I rode to the base. I get everything ready and I go out and start to get on my motor scooter, and my landlady, who is a well-educated lady, is a doctor's wife and ended up coming to the U.S., as a matter of fact. And she says, you can't go. And I said, what do you mean I can't go? She says, VC all around. I said, yeah. She says, you come up on the roof with me. There's a two-story. I went up on the roof, and there was shooting going all around, but the most amazing part of it was, here's a guy that I knew, that I didn't even know he was in Vietnam. He and another guy, and they've got 4 guns. I said, we're in business. So we stayed around for a few minutes and watched activity about a block away. There's guys throwing hand grenades and everything else, and still no real word about what was going on. And one of the other guy says, he had a Jeep. I says, let's go to the damn base. We don't need to be here. Well, we don't know whether we can get it. I said, we've got 4 guns. We'll make it. And I convinced both of them. One of them was a colonel and one was a lieutenant colonel. And I'm still a major at that point. We go to the gate at Da Nang, and there's a tank. It's blocked. But there's a tank with its gun pointed right at us. I mean, it's moving, the gun. Mm-hmm. And we pull up and it says, you can't drive on base. What do you mean you can't drive on base? It's a military vehicle. Well, you might get in the line of fire. And I said, well, what are we going to get in if we walk? Mm-hmm. I got a half a mile to walk. So I went on in, and a lot of people didn't make it into work because they were stranded in different parts and they had told everybody to stay home after they'd gotten the word. I slept on my desk for a week. Mm-hmm. I didn't go back to where I lived.
You don't want to go back out in that again.
About 2 days after all of this happened, one of the guys that worked for me, a kid by the name of Williamson, called and says, I'm supposed to go back to the U.S. My tour's up day after tomorrow. I don't have a way to get into town. Nobody will come pick me up. So I went down myself and one of the other guys that worked for me and got the loan of General Jonesy Bolt's Jeep. Mm-hmm. We didn't tell him where we were going. We got a couple of M16s and a couple of 38s and a load of ammo. Didn't know where we were going, but we found it. Got to the guy's place where he lived, and there were two other guys that were living there that wanted to leave as well. We got him back, I took him down, he got on the airplane and left. We didn't know some of the territory that we went through was some of the worst VC territory there was, but when you're dumb, it works.
God looks out for you. Wow. Well, that project that you were working on, let me go back and just had one question on the munitions that you all were developing. What were the munitions that, because that was...
They were special munitions that were supposed to be used in conjunction with the all air delivered. Some were Army and Air Force. They were little bomblets about so big that were anti-vehicle type bombs that you put on, drop on. They go slightly underground, and if the vehicle drives over them, they could have a setting on them to detonate after the first, second, or third vehicle, whatever, went across. They were little brown bags of stuff that if you walked on them, they could injure your foot. That's about all I could say. The other part was to signal if there was any activity going through a particular area.
Mm-hmm.
And
this was all new at that time.
yeah, this was all new stuff.
Yeah.
And there were 4 different ones. I can't even remember all of the different things now.
So I see here where you've rapped with a king from Norway. I think that's probably going to go back a little bit.
That was back before some of the other stuff. That was back, I'm trying to remember, I was at 7th, 9th Air Force? No, I was up at Seymour Johnson. That was a special 19th Air Force. And we had, I was the planner and whatnot for a squadron to deploy and employ it while I was there and operate all of the equipment and whatnot for.
This is why you were based in Norway?
No, this was while I was based in North Carolina at Seymour Johnson, and we flew over there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then we had an exercise going in Norway, and I had to run all of this stuff, including the command post and that sort of thing. As a young major, there were lieutenant colonels and colonels around, but they just let me do it.
So you were a major at this point then? Okay, yeah.
Anyway, I was in the ops. I'd been there for quite a little while, and I was working, and this guy tapped me on the shoulder, and it was a Norwegian lieutenant colonel. And he says, "The king wants to talk to you." And the who? I turned around, and then here's this big guy, and he puts his hand on, and he's a very cordial person.
Mm-hmm.
And spoke English, and we talked for a little bit. And of course, I had to get back to work, but I thought it was rather unusual for a king to come in with one person and talk to me alone.
Did you ever figure out why you were the person?
Well, he came, I suppose, as part of the program to welcome us there in conjunction with the Norwegian people that we were working with.
Okay.
But it so happened at the time I was the only American in the place.
Okay.
But he was very cordial, and I thought it was different to meet a king. There's not too many people who get an opportunity to do that.
Okay. Okay, so tell me more. Did you go back to Vietnam, or did you do?
I went back to Vietnam as what we call the Tactical Air Command Liaison Officer, who worked directly with 7th Air Force, 713th at this point.
Okay.
I was on a level to talk to the TAC commander, which meant that if they needed something special, rather than going through various routes and whatnot to get it or get it done, that I could pick up the phone or send a message to TAC and tell them what they needed and how, and if it was available, it was there. and vice versa. It was a kind of a two-way street.
Yeah.
But it's a very good tour for me. It was at a time that I was sitting at the evening briefing with the DO, who was a two-star general, passed away a couple of years ago now. Behind him, when the message came in, someone knocked on the door and says, "There is a special message, please let us in." He handed the message to the general. He's sitting there reading it, and I'm reading it over his shoulder. It was the release to go north in 72, December 72.
To go north is the
That's
fly.
when we started bombing and strafing, and really did. Actually, it was a war winner if we had followed through the way we. So, with that, he set a smile, and the first thing he says, "We're clear to go get them." And
So how long did that last?
well, not for a real long period initially, because it was at the end of the year in December time frame when it started. So the holidays came along, but it lasted on longer than that. But we put, I say we, 7th Air Force, 713, put everything that we had, B-52s and everything. It was all scheduled to go in at various times and whatnot. The fighters were providing flak suppression, dropping chaff for the routes in for the B-52s. And we learned a lot. I say we, I think the Air Force learned a lot from that exercise. People didn't fully understand, I think, how you evade munitions coming from the ground. Even though you have the electronic devices to do it, you got to keep them in the right place. What happens is they start firing missiles from outside of the area and guiding them from another. And if you bank, you're blocking something over here, but you're uncovered. And the B-52s had a little bit of a problem that way.
Okay. That was in the early 70s.
That was in 72,
Okay.
December 72.
You know, tell me about, there was an assignment that you had regarding Quezon, the Marine base in Quezon.
Oh, that was the Marine base in Quezon when it was about to be overrun. I was in that same business at 7th, 13th Air Force, well, 7th Air Force at the time when I was there. And my boss, who was a colonel, and I was still a major at the time, came back in the office and he says, "They told me I got to have this plan ready and I don't know where to start on why." Anyway, I said, I heard him and I came out of my office. And I said, "What seems to be the problem?" He says, "I don't know how to do this." And I said, "What do you need?" He says, "I've got to write a plan to defend Quezon." I said, "We can do that. That's no problem. I know how to do that." So I put the plan together for the defense of Quezon. It was probably the most coming together of all of the military during the Vietnam War, because everybody was involved. We had the Navy. We were all cooperating, I should put it that way.
Right.
It's one of the few times that we cooperated with our air the way that we did. The Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, even the Army with helicopters and that sort of thing. But most of it was the bombing and protecting of the guys in the compound.
Was this around Tet?
Well, it was beyond Tet as far as defense and whatnot was concerned. It was a totally different thing.
Yeah.
General Westmoreland didn't believe in giving it up because it was like the French giving up when they had their fiasco. I don't remember the exercise particularly, but his point would be to prove that you can't overrun this top of a hill, but you got surrounded. We were landing people in airplanes, C-130s, any cargo airplane. We were taking stuff in, we were taking ammo in. I mean, touching down, dragging it off, and hopping back out. All sorts of things of that sort. No one was leaving. Eventually, I knew a guy, as a matter of fact, worked for him, who had been there during that particular time. And he said, me being him, never thought that we would leave that hilltop. He says, they were dropping napalm within less than 100 yards of the barbed wire. And the reason being, they were digging zigzag trenches to get up to the barbed wire so they could cut it and come through. Zigzag type thing, it's very difficult to shoot anybody, particularly if you're not above them. But we had fighters escorting all the cargo airplanes. If they saw a gun fire, they rolled in on it, off the end of the runway or wherever. And it was amazing to talk to this particular guy and him relating the stories that he did.
We'll just let it go.
I seldom answer that phone anyway.
Well,
Those are. Am I extending your time too much?
no, we're about ready to get into your retirement, though, and but I wanted to find out when you.
There's not much to talk about in my retirement.
Okay. But that was a pretty significant job that you had in terms of caisson, because that was such a political issue at the time.
Well, it was, and I felt really grateful that I was able to do something. You have to remember, I was kind of an independent at 7th Air Force, because I went from one different job, but it's all special stuff.
Yeah.
And nobody really knew what I did.
Well, you did it all.
Well, I felt, but that's what my job was. Whether I was rewarded appropriately or not is not to be. I was in the Air Force to do a job, and sometimes I didn't understand how the political system worked.
But you say you lived your dream.
Yes.
And what was that?
Well, flying airplanes and flying fighters in particular, and seeing both sides of the story from a command-like standpoint, from observation and writing plans and that sort of thing to accomplish what needs to be accomplished.
Yeah.
Vietnam, I can't say all the things I'd like to say about it.
No.
It was an experience. For some people, it was a bad experience, and for most of us, it was just an occurrence that we survived. We did not accomplish our mission.
Well, we weren't allowed to.
That's the story.
Well, do you want to talk about, because you retired in '79?
I retired in '79. I had gone back to 9th Air Force and spent some time there. And as a matter of fact, I had gone back over from 9th Air Force to the TACLO job that I was talking about. I had learned and known a lot of people in the Air Force, but I never sought a great deal of help from anybody. I was told when I came in the Air Force, do your job and the Air Force will take care of you. Does that sound strange?
So did that work out?
Well, it did to a certain extent. I don't think that I should have ever progressed any further than I did. I wasn't interested.
There you go.
I don't think I could have acted in that capacity the way that some people do.
Well, you know, sometimes it's not a matter of able to hack it, it's just a matter of wanting to hack it.
Well, there's a lot to be said for that. And I'm not claiming that I did. After I retired, I had planned on coming back to Tucson when we had rotated from Hawaii. We spent 4 years in Hawaii. We came back through here. We'd sold our original house and bought some property here because we had planned on coming back. Mm-hmm. Just before I retired, we flew down to Florida one weekend, spent a week down there, and we thought, hey, maybe it'd be nice to live in Florida. There's a little airport that I looked at. The guy was looking to sell his FBO there. I said, well, we'll go down and give it a try. Well, all of it fell through. There's various reasons for it, but one of the old stories, I guess, is around a small area of people that grew up together and whatnot. An outsider doesn't fit. Mm-hmm. When you get in and start going into a business that is oriented to the government, if you will. You understand what I'm talking about. So I had an attorney that I was working with. He said, Pete, I hate to tell you this, but it's not going to work out for you because they're not going to let it work out for you. Yeah. So I abandoned it and we moved to Tucson. Well, in between, I had come out to Tucson and talked to Hoot, who was my best friend and was in real estate, actually development and everything else at that particular point. He says, get your fanny out here now. And we'd been good friends, but now he's telling me, get out here. Mm-hmm. So I flew back home. I was getting out of the airplane and the wife says, when are we moving to Tucson? She was ready to come.
So honey Jean wanted to come to Tucson. Yeah.
So I said, when do you want to leave?
Yeah.
So we packed up and moved to Tucson, and Hoot had looked for a couple places for us to live. I hardly got the car parked good, and he says, you get down to real estate school because I need some help.
Oh, that worked out pretty well.
I went to school and went to work for Hoot, and after about 6 months, I dropped out of his organization, not from him, but I went to another and operated there and did several different affairs and stayed in the real estate business, did pretty well at it. Mm-hmm. Hoot and I made some good investments. Hoot used to live right back behind me here. I bought this property, the land from him.
Now tell me where you met him.
I'm sorry?
Where did you meet him?
Where did I meet him? Well, I met him many years before at Nellis when he was there, but only casually. And when we were in Europe, my boss and I, the general, had gone down to Aviano, Italy. And I forget what we were doing there. We'd gone in a 100F, 2-seat F-100. And Hoot was there. We had gone up in the mountains to a special place that we always went to have dinner, came back down, and everybody else went to bed. Hoot and I went over to the club and just sitting there. There were people there, but not many. And we were sitting at the bar just talking back and forth. Mm-hmm. That was kind of our initial friendship, if you will. And I look around and there's nobody in the club. And I turned to the bartender and I said, what time do you close? He says, when you guys leave. And it's 2:30 in the morning. And I've got an 8 o'clock takeoff in an F-100. I go, busted up, and anyway, we got off and got back home okay. Well, after I came back, and just before Hoot retired, he was my boss at 9th Air Force. He and I got along really well on everything we did. He got out and came out here. And of course, that was really what started our close friendship and whatnot. But after we came out here, like I said, I went to real estate school. Started out with him, did pretty well at it. Opened up after we'd been in that for a while, investments of one type or another. Another guy and I opened a delicatessen restaurant up. And because of all things, Chicago Deli. And I'd been through Chicago a couple of times, but the other guy was from there. And he decided he wanted out of it, and I took it over myself as a partial thing because I was still doing real estate, investing, and whatever. And it worked out pretty well. Turned it into a catering service, had more catering. The kind of catering that I was doing was pharmaceutical companies. They used to have all these people come in. We want a luncheon here, a luncheon there. It's all prepared food, not served food. And one of the best businesses a person could get in, I guess. Knew when you needed to do it, what you had to buy to do it. It wasn't stocking something so that you had it on hand. And eventually, I decided that I'd had enough of that, closed it out, and Hoot and I went a little stronger in other things, ended up with a little strip mall, invested in property in different parts of the state, for that matter. I still own some property down around Portal, some out at Vail. And it's not a good time to be selling property right now.
No. Well, tell me a little bit about your daughter and your grandson.
Well, an interesting part about it, the daughter, of course, is her first experience was we moved to Hawaii, and she grew up like a little Hawaiian girl. She didn't dress like them, went to school with them and whatnot for her first 4 years of life. And it was a big change moving back to the continent here, and the cold weather and the cool weather, just moving and leaving her friends. Yeah. But she did well. She actually wanted to stay in Florida because those were some of her friends at that age. And eventually, of course, when we got out here and she got settled, enjoyed it, went to the university for a while and went to Pima College, one thing and another. One day she was going down one of the main streets here in Tucson, and a car crossed over head-on from 6 lanes of traffic and hit her head-on. Mm. And it damaged some of her spine and whatnot. At the time, she didn't know that. Cracked some ribs and things of that sort. And the driver disappeared across the border. And about a year after this happened, she had a problem with her back, and it accelerated and whatnot. She couldn't walk very well for a while, and then she had a blood clot in her leg. That caused problems. And a couple of years later, she had a mild stroke from basically the same source.
Yeah.
she had what was called factor V blood. I don't know whether you've ever heard of that or not, but it's the blood thickens faster than normal. And it was a long time before they discovered it. As a matter of fact, she was pregnant when she found out about it, and they wanted her to terminate because it could kill you just like that because of. She said, "No, wait." She went through all of this. The baby was born, my grandson. She called us within an hour after the baby was born, told us everything was okay. By this time, my wife was ill, and we went by to see the baby, and he's grown up to be a nice young man. As a matter of fact, he wanted to know if he could come and sit with us while we were doing this interview, and I told him I didn't think
Well, we'll make a DVD
it would
for
work
him.
out quite well.
Yeah.
But he has been over this morning and helped me around the house a little bit. Now, the daughter, of course, as I said, become partially incapacitated, her left arm, and she has a problem walking. She can't walk without a walker. She uses a scooter, drives her car, does everything very well, except I just have to praise her because I don't know how I could put up with that sort of thing.
Sounds like she has a lot of heart.
Very, very much.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, she called me and wanted to know if I wanted her to come over and pick her son up, Sebastian, so that I didn't have to drive back over there. We'd go out to dinner on Friday evening or Saturday evening and brunch on a Sunday.
Good.
And Sebastian spends the night with me every Saturday night. He's learning a lot of bad habits.
Well, you got people who love you. Yeah. Now, do you still see some of the guys you served with?
Seldom see any that I served directly with. I have a roommate that I went through flying school at Williams that lives up in Phoenix. He has recently had some health problems, and I hadn't seen him in a while. And there's one other guy that lives in Phoenix that I know that was classmate. But we're all getting up in age now, and it's difficult for most of them to travel. I feel extremely fortunate to be able to move around as much as I do and as active as I am. A lot of people can't live by themselves.
Yeah. You are.
I live here totally by myself.
You are fortunate. You are fortunate.
And it sometimes gets, particularly when I need to go someplace. But I have a couple roommates. I've got a little white cockatoo that the wife and daughter gathered together about 20 some odd years ago, and I have a cat that has been in here. You saw her. She is working on 19 years of age.
Well,
That cat puts me to bed at night and wakes me up in the morning.
you've carved out a good life.
She is just an amazing cat, a Burmese cat. And like I say, she's lost a little weight, getting old. I need to take her probably by the vet sometimes this week. But all of these things just make my life a lot different. You know, if you just sit and don't do anything, before long, that's all you're going to be able to do.
Yeah. Keep moving. Do you still have that jet fighter's sort of mindset?
Yeah. There's nothing like flying a fighter jet. And I guess the most freedom comes if you fly a single seat jet. You worry only about yourself. You don't have to think about, I wonder if what the other guy is thinking. And I've always stressed that I think a single seat fighter is the best way to go.
But you still have that kind of mindset of,
Oh, yes.
oh yeah, okay. Well, I think that's a good place to end. So I want to thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's part of my responsibility as being an American.
And I appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you very much.
Thank you.